In the late 1960s, America was standing at a crossroads. The country was divided by war, shaken by political assassinations, and haunted by social unrest. For many young people, life felt uncertain, and the future seemed impossible to predict. This was the environment that allowed Charles Manson to rise. He appeared as a drifter with nothing, but he carried with him an unsettling charisma. His words could be both soothing and frightening, offering answers to questions that no one else seemed to solve. To those searching for belonging, Manson was a figure who promised freedom, love, and a sense of purpose. It began innocently enough for the young people who met him. He played the guitar, spoke about peace, and encouraged them to reject the material world. The idea of escaping society's rules was seductive, and slowly they began to follow him, leaving behind families, jobs, and their own identities. What seemed like a carefree commune was far more sinister. On the surface, the group looked like free spirits, living on the edge of Los Angeles, wandering the desert, and embracing what they called a new way of life. In reality, it was a carefully designed system of control. Manson isolated his followers from the outside world, making sure their only source of truth was his voice. He convinced them that the world was broken, that society was corrupt, and that only he could lead them to a better future. They called him their leader, their teacher, and sometimes even their savior. His control was absolute, and he never allowed doubt to creep in. Drugs played a role in keeping the family bound together. Under the influence, his followers were easier to manipulate, their minds more open to his disturbing visions. He spoke of destruction and renewal, of chaos giving birth to a new order, and of their special role in shaping it all. The young men and women who joined him believed they had found a family that loved them unconditionally, but what they had really found was a prison without walls. Manson knew exactly how to exploit their fears and desires. Every promise of freedom was a chain, every message of peace was laced with violence. By the end of the decade, his so-called family was no longer a group of lost souls searching for meaning. They were soldiers in a nightmare they did not fully understand, bound to a man who had convinced them that love and death were the same path. Charles Manson's vision of the future was not one of peace, but of war. He believed that society was on the edge of collapse and that a violent revolution would tear America apart. To his followers, he described this coming conflict in vivid detail, calling it helter skelter asterisk, a phrase he borrowed from a song but twisted into something apocalyptic. In his mind, this war would be the ultimate test of survival, and he convinced his family that they were chosen to play a central role in it. What began as scattered ideas soon became a full doctrine. Every gathering, every drug-fueled session, and every story Manson told was designed to prepare his followers for the chaos he claimed was coming. They began to believe that only through violence could they spark the revolution and prove their loyalty to him. Manson's control deepened as he blurred the lines between fantasy and reality. He insisted that music, symbols, and even random events were secret messages confirming his prophecy. His followers accepted these claims without question, interpreting coincidences as signs and his words as undeniable truth. They started collecting weapons, rehearsing scenarios, and speaking of themselves not as individuals, but as part of a single body, united under his vision. At their desert hideouts and in abandoned ranches, they lived as if cut off from the rest of the world, sharpening their obedience and hardening their minds. Each day was a lesson in loyalty, and each night was filled with stories of bloodshed and rebirth. Fear was one of Manson's greatest tools. He told his followers that the outside world would reject them, that only he could protect them, and that enemies were everywhere. To remain safe, they had to obey him completely. Those who hesitated were ridiculed or broken down until they gave in. By the time the family was fully under his control, they no longer saw killing as unthinkable. It was simply another step toward the destiny he described. The promise of rebuilding a new world gave meaning to their sacrifices, and the constant pressure of his presence left little room for doubt. Slowly, violence became not only expected but inevitable. As the summer of 1969 approached, the tension within the family grew heavier. The talk of war had gone on long enough, and Manson's patience was wearing thin. He wanted to prove his prophecy right, to show the world that he had the power to bring about the chaos he promised. The preparations were complete, the followers were ready, and all that remained was to strike. The warm summer nights of August 1969 seemed calm on the surface, but inside the Manson family, something sinister was reaching its peak. For months, Charles Manson had been speaking about the war he believed was coming, insisting that the first spark had to be set by his followers. On one of those nights, he gave a command that would transform dark words into action. His loyal disciples, already stripped of their own morality, accepted his order without hesitation. They climbed into a car and drove through Los Angeles, searching for the perfect target. Their minds were clouded by Manson's teachings, and their hearts were hardened by the belief that they were fulfilling destiny. The home they chose was not random to Manson. It once belonged to a music producer who had rejected him, and although new people lived there, that rejection still burned inside him. To his followers, the details did not matter. They were told to spread fear, to commit violence so brutal that the world would take notice. The house, quiet and isolated, became the stage for one of the most horrifying crimes in American history. Inside was actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, along with her friends who had gathered for an evening of peace. None of them had any idea that death was waiting just outside. What unfolded next was pure terror. The intruders showed no mercy, carrying out their orders with chilling devotion. The violence was not quick or silent. It was drawn out, chaotic, and fueled by a frenzy that seemed to feed on itself. The victims were defenseless, caught in a nightmare from which there was no escape. By the time the killers slipped back into the night, the scene they left behind was one of unimaginable brutality. When morning came and the crime was discovered, Los Angeles changed forever. News of the murders spread like wildfire, and the details were almost too horrific to believe. A young, beloved actress and her unborn child had been slaughtered, along with her friends, in what seemed like a senseless act. The public struggled to comprehend how such violence could erupt in such a quiet, glamorous neighborhood. Fear seeped into every home, and the city's image of safety was shattered. The killings were not just murders, they were a message, though no one yet understood what that message was or who had sent it. What began that night was not only the destruction of innocent lives, but the beginning of America's darkest nightmare. The morning after the first murders, the city of Los Angeles awoke to fear unlike anything it had ever known. The crime scene at the Tate residence was so gruesome that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend it. The brutality suggested rage, yet there was no clear motive. Ordinary citizens wondered if the killers were still lurking nearby, ready to strike again. That fear proved justified when, the very next night, another family was targeted. This time, it was the home of Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, a successful couple who had no connection to Sharon Tate or her circle of friends. Their quiet house became the setting for another wave of unimaginable violence. The murders were carried out with the same cruelty, and when the killers left, they scrawled disturbing messages on the walls, written in the victims' own blood. By then, panic had spread far beyond Los Angeles. Newspapers and television broadcasts described scenes of horror that seemed impossible to escape. The randomness of the attacks terrified people most of all. These were not crimes of greed or revenge. They appeared senseless, designed only to instill fear. Across California, people rushed to lock their doors and install security measures. Neighbors who once trusted each other began to look with suspicion, and the glittering world of Hollywood felt as vulnerable as any small town. The sense that anyone could be next hung heavy in the air. For weeks, the police were left grasping at shadows. The lack of clear connections between the victims made the investigation feel like chasing smoke. Whispers began to circulate about cults, satanic rituals, or deranged killers choosing victims at random. Meanwhile, the killers themselves went about their lives as though nothing had happened, returning to their hideouts and continuing under Manson's control. Some of them even bragged privately within the group, convinced they had helped ignite the revolution he promised. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Detectives followed every lead, and the media fueled speculation with every headline. The city was gripped not only by fear, but also by fascination. Who could be capable of such cruelty? And why? The crimes were unlike anything the country had witnessed before, a collision of chaos and cruelty that felt more like fiction than reality. It was clear that the nightmare was not over, and until the killers were caught, the entire nation remained on edge, waiting for the next strike that could come at any time. The arrests, when they finally came, revealed a truth so disturbing that the nation could hardly believe it. The killers were not hardened criminals or professional assassins. They were young men and women, many barely out of their teenage years, who had once lived ordinary lives. Under the spell of Charles Manson, they had transformed into ruthless murderers, convinced that their actions were part of a higher plan. The image of carefree youths turned into instruments of violence was more terrifying than the crimes themselves. It showed how easily the vulnerable could be twisted into tools of destruction when manipulated by a skilled and dangerous leader. The trial became one of the most shocking spectacles in American history. Manson entered the courtroom not with shame, but with arrogance, carving a symbol into his forehead and turning every session into a performance. His followers mirrored his defiance, smiling and laughing as horrifying evidence was read aloud. The world watched in disbelief as these young faces displayed no remorse for the brutality they had carried out. The chilling loyalty they still showed to Manson demonstrated the depth of his control, even when the evidence against them was undeniable. Witnesses testified to the strange rituals, the prophesies of helter skelter and the atmosphere of fear that had bound the family together. Each revelation added another layer of horror, exposing how the promise of love and belonging had been used to mask violence and death. The jury listened to stories of brainwashing, manipulation, and blind devotion, and in the end, justice demanded the harshest punishment. Manson and several of his followers were sentenced to death, though the sentences were later changed to life imprisonment. But even behind bars, the shadow of Manson lingered. He became a symbol of evil, his name forever linked with madness and cruelty. The crimes were more than just murders. They marked the end of an era. The carefree spirit of the 1960s dissolved in the wake of such senseless brutality, replaced by suspicion and fear. Families who once saw the counterculture as harmless began to see the danger that could lie beneath its surface. America realized that the nightmare was not just about one man or his followers, but about how easily darkness can take root when people are desperate to belong. The legacy of the Manson family was not just the lives they destroyed, but the lasting scar they left on a nation that would never look at innocence the same way again.